Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Jacqueline Dupre Music Building. I'm delighted to be here with Elaine Mitchener.
Hello, hello.
My name is Jennifer Walshe. I'm Professor of Composition here at Oxford. My colleague Martin Harry, the other Professor of Composition, is there in the audience. And we're going to be talking to Elaine for about 40-45 minutes. Elaine's work is going to be featured in a concert tonight by Ensemble ICES. And so we thought it's a unique opportunity to learn a little bit more about Elaine's practice and some of the works that unfortunately those of you on YouTube will not be hearing tonight, but everybody in the room will be hearing tonight. So Elaine is a sort of you're really like a multi-hyphenate artist, in that you not only make work, you perform work both by yourself and by other people. You're an improviser, you work with visual artists also, you also work with movement artists. You're a movement artist yourself and sort of have expanded the idea of what a singer can be. And sort of, so when I think about you, I think about somebody who's doing a lot of, you're like a model slash actress slash perfume magnet out in LA or something like that. What's always really struck me about your work is that you're utterly committed to the performances that you do. I remember seeing you do some of David Toop's sort of improvised opera work in Aldeburgh years ago, and feeling that I had to have been listening to somebody sing something that they had practiced a million times, and afterwards you said to me, no, there's just some text, and I sort of embody it and sing it through.
Ages ago.
I know. Deep cut. So I've also seen you in many, many other works. Your big Wigmore Hall portrait concert, where you were embodying lots and lots of different personae, moving between lots of works. And tonight I know there'll be different works performed by the students. What's also struck me is the music theatre projects that you have sort of not only performed in and helped write, but conceptualized from the start. So I think of Sweet Tooth, your opera project, which is fantastic and you can watch online easily if anybody wants to see it. And I also think of On Being Human as Praxis, which was a project for Donna Weschingen, where you worked with multiple different composers and developed works, all grounding them in certain sociological theories. So I understand that you have 3 clips queued up, and that we could maybe start with those clips so the audience could get a sense of what your work is like before we start talking.
Yes, the clips that are going to be shown. Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's a real pleasure and honour to be here. I've had a fantastic day and a half here and at St Hilda's, and I am going to ask Dan to show 3 pieces. The first is the then plus the now equals now time, and that's exploring philosophical ideas around Walter Benjamin, who I took inspiration from, and it was premiered in Berlin in 2019 at Märzmusik. It's a solo piece for voice and an electronic soundscape. That's going to be followed by Sweet Tooth, which is music theatre piece examining the history, looking into the relationship between the UK and the Caribbean through the Atlantic slave trade. And the last clip will be from something more recent, a performance of 8 Songs for a Mad King, in which the choreographer that I have collaborated with for over 10 years, Dam van Huynh, made a solo movement piece, about 7 minutes, which was bolted on to the piece itself before I launched into the mad world of George III. So we're just going to show those clips. Thank you.
Between this country and the West Indies and Caribbean is inextricable. The first British ships arrived in the Caribbean in 1623, And despite slavery, despite colonization, can she explain how many have been deported? It is her country. Can she tell the House how many have been denied health under the National Health Service? How many have denied pensions? How many have lost their jobs? This is a day of national shame.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for sharing these clips.
Thank you.
So do you want to talk us through them? Maybe start with the first one.
Yeah, for then plus the now, because now time, I really wanted to play with this idea of the past, how, well, actually most of my work is talking about, centers around history and how the things that happen in the past really affects our present, how we interpret that, how we choose to acknowledge or choose to not acknowledge things of the past, and how that affects our present and also affects the future. And the notion of Eingedenken, that's that thing of remembrance as an act of responsibility. And I was looking at that and what that meant, and how I might be able to work with speeches or texts, and how other writers such as James Baldwin or Sojourner Truth, which is the Ain't I a Woman speech, David Lammy's speech to Parliament in response to the Windrush scandal, which when you place it in context of writers or thinkers or speakers of the past, it actually sounds much older than it is. And what I needed to do with that is to use those texts as a sound piece, and I also drew from lots of sounds from everyday life. So I was sourcing sounds of protests and marches, and there are marches. There's a sound at the beginning of that piece where it sounds like a carnival. Mm-hmm. It's actually a protest march in, I think it was Barcelona, against housing issues, but it sounds really celebratory. But when you listen to what they're actually saying, then they're talking about people being thrown out of their houses and they're fighting for their accommodation. But it's that juxtaposition of something that sounds really joyful, but actually what they're marching about is really important, and for the right to have a roof over their heads. And the other march the protest sound that you could hear is an anti-capitalist march that happened in Nuremberg. But because you can hear a lot of men shouting, and it's in German, and it has a certain resonance. It's also, unless you understand, you can speak German, you can understand, think, where is this, what's happening, so it's how I'm playing with these kind of notions of how we perceive sound, or how we interpret what we're hearing if we don't have the visual as well. Mm-hmm. And when I asked Dam to choreograph it, we're looking at ways of how, because he's a very interesting choreographer in that he doesn't, music doesn't affect the way the movement, and he doesn't choreograph movement to music. So we work in silence, and that has had an effect on the way that I make music as well. The way silence is treated, how rhythm is felt, an internal rhythm, and having that's to ground you. So he really wasn't that interested in the soundscape as such, but one of the main challenges at the beginning of that piece, it's what do we do with silence? And I stand in silence for about 2.5 minutes, almost 3 minutes, just eyeballing the audience. But in that silence, there's this immense sound, there's all this sound, the ambient sound that you can hear, and people become very, because, there's the anticipation of something happening, and the light changes, and I'm aware of people breathing, I'm aware of hearing my own breath, I'm aware of people shifting in the seats, or as this was actually in Berlin and they're not that easily impressed by anything and they're used to seeing things, they were all staring back, and I thought, okay, here we go, this is going to be interesting, okay, you're going to come on this journey with me. And so when I start actually vocalizing, that is Sojourner Truth's statement, Ain't I a Woman? And I bring in text by Bell Hooks, I bring in text by James Baldwin. It's all interwoven. So it's chopping and changing, but it's a lot of, and you'll appreciate this because you work with text so brilliantly, and all the memory work that goes into kind of making it very fluent, plus the movement. And it's also the movement becomes, it's part of the music. The actual physicality of making these shapes and crafting the space with the body is really interesting for me, how it manipulates and changes the voice, what is possible and what isn't. And I'm always examining those things and testing those ideas. At the very basic, I'm kind of a song and dance girl, right? So it's, but I kind of twist and mangle it a bit more because it's not just, you know, jazz hands and teeth and smiling. Though I'm not against that, you know. I'd quite like to include that in work as well. So there are moments for me in that piece where there's the joy of just hearing children playing, and that's a release for me, and I'm kind of jumping, and the jump is really exhausting because I'm just jumping on the spot, and probably people are exhausted watching it. I've found that when I've done my pieces, people are even more exhausted than I am, because you know, when you're kind of absorbed into something, you're breathing with the person on stage, you're really living it. And if that happens, then I feel it's pretty successful. Yeah.
Can I ask you then, if you're working in silence when you're working with Dam on these pieces, are you vocalizing as you're working on the choreography, or do you layer the vocalizing on afterwards?
Sometimes it's a bit of both, actually. It depends on how much of the vocal line I feel very secure about, and where I think musically it should be going. And then but it's important for him to understand, just he's always got the text as well, and we go through it and we discuss things. Because from a practical point of view, he needs to know what I'm capable of doing, or where, you know, so that, okay, if you want me to repeat this, actually at this point I need to breathe because I've got to sing this particular line, and I wanted it's quite high in my register, and I want a floaty sound. So if I'd be jumping for almost 5 minutes, I'm not going to be able to do that. How do we do that? And then we find ways to make this work. And it's exciting because we're teaching each other as well, and we're learning together, and we're really discovering a lot of things. And just watching those, I think, oh, did I do that? Can I do that? Oh, right, okay, not bad.
Because I'm always struck by, when I see you perform in works like the clips that you just showed me, that it seems flawlessly integrated. It doesn't seem like sometimes you see opera singers and you can see them literally thinking, okay, I have to do this movement while I sing, you know, a piece that was composed without any thought to what the movement would be during this scene. And so it's always interesting to me watching your work how integrated it is, and particularly in Sweet Tooth, where I feel of all the pieces that I've seen by you, that to me the movements seem the most extreme there, like and you're pulling at your face, you know, and at times you're very contorted, and so I'm curious how you developed the vocal lines and how you thought about the music. I can see Paul, I can see Mark in there playing and everything. So I'm curious how you thought about both your vocal line and then what the other musicians were doing.
Yes, thanks. Sweet Tooth was, it took about 4 years to make. The idea was using this thing of sugar, that the greed and the fact that sugar is addictive, that's what drove the trade and kept the trade going for much longer, and the human cost of that. But I was also looking at the resilience and the resistance, and seeing this as this is part of our human history. It's not just this is a black thing, this is a British and Caribbean thing. This event really shook the world and changed a lot of things. And I was thinking about my A-team for that. I needed a group of players that I knew could improvise, but also take instruction, and also would be mad enough to be moved around the stage by a choreographer. And so Jason Yarde, saxophonist, and Sylvia Hallett, who's a multi-instrumentalist and a fine composer in her own right. All of them compose, actually. And Mark Sanders is a great improvising drummer, percussionist. And they all said, yeah, we've never played together in that formation before. And they said, yeah, we'll do this. Yeah, it sounds like a great project. I said, yeah, you've got to move around as well. So there was some resistance, but that's where I brought in Dam, who's great at working with organic bodies. That's untrained dancers. And there was, because he observes how people move when they're playing. And they're so fluid and relaxed when they're playing. But it's that thing of, can you just go and pick that bamboo stick up and wave it around? And it's kind of stick men, because everybody, they just feel really kind of self-conscious. So we took a lot of time to break that down gently. Dam devised ways in which we worked together as a kind of a dance company as well, to just work with our own bodies and to gain the trust. Each part of Sweet Tooth, which is in 6 sections, is examining an aspect of this experience. I draw on Kumina language, Kumina culture, which is a Jamaican religious cult, which has very strong West African origins. It's still there's a specific language. It's dying out because people are not sharing that knowledge anymore. So I did some research there, drawing on texts from Kumina Queens. And I sing that text as using the text as a way to link the beginning to the end of the piece. In the work, I talk about this, the universal experience, that what this occurrence, how it does affect the whole world. And that's something that we should be lamenting over. And then with the instrumentalists, I mean, we pored over a lot of historical kind of documents. I had a consultant who, his PhD was on a slave owner in Jamaica. That's my heritage, is Jamaican through my parents. And Krista Petzley from Southampton University was great. He even performed with us in an early stage of the R&D. He was invaluable in kind of helping to direct me to specific kind of books and things. And I was really struck by how did this trade last so long? What is it? Is the fear. And fear is heard and felt. So I was thinking about plantations and how they were run and what happened. And there are lots of documents, diaries by slaveholders of what happened on the plantations. Horrific things. But also their paranoia as they saw different revolts happening around the Caribbean. And so I was looking at what is the sound of fear, what is the sound of resistance, what is that, the sound of joy, because there's a humanity there. Those enslaved peoples had lives, they dreamt dreams, they wanted different. And so I really wanted to bring that to the fore. So all the movement was kind of drawing on that. And there's a clip there where you see me really kind of holding on to my body and examining my body, and that was in a section called Scramble, where unlike in parts of the south of southern states, where there was slave auctions and blocks, which seems more familiar, I think, in the Caribbean, they would enslave people who were brought on ships. They would be put into a room, not a very large room, and slaveholders would place the amount of money that they had, and they'd literally open the door and take a rope and get as many people as they could and gather them together, and that's what they did, and that was called the Scramble. And the Scramble, they would also check for the fitness levels because they're going to work these people. And that was what I was doing. My hands weren't my hands anymore. But that was actually, Dam and I worked on that a lot. And it was very, very difficult. And it's very, very difficult to do. And I know it's very hard for people to watch. But I couldn't think of another way sonically to kind of express something that was actually happening. And that's done in silence. But you kind of hear the thumps, you feel things. There are things that you can hear. But I don't think it needed anything more than that. And there's moments where Guinea Corn, which is like a work song, where you could hear most of it where I'm singing Guinea Corn, na, 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 na. And so that's a moment of those people finding a way to live life and enjoy life, even for a moment. And even in that, towards the end of that, that is curtailed. And there's a very violent ending with that. And Jason who's an astonishing saxophonist, is screaming through the instrument and playing incredible things through that, and it moves into towards the last section of the work. But Sweet Tooth needed the time. We needed to give it the time to come together. It wasn't a project that could rush through.
I'm curious because with Sweet Tooth and the way you talk about it, it's so layered, so much research, so much thought, working with consultants, you know, really trying to like understand, you know, the nuances of the history, and thinking about how to represent violence as well as how to represent joy, like our long incubation periods for those sort of projects. I'm curious if we can maybe explode the lens out a little bit, because what strikes me about your practice is that there's no clear path. Like, you can't say, I want to do movement and vocal, you know, improvisation and composition. Oh, what university offers a course in that? So I'm curious to know, like, because it seems to me in many ways like you've made these almost temporary companies. Like you talked about, it was like forming a dance company. Yeah. Like you sort of have Dam as your choreographer, you know, for 10 years, but you do these projects where you sort of make a company for a while and then let that dissolve and then make another company for a while. So maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of how you got to that point.
Right, I think it's just necessity, you know, it's just, you have an idea for a project and no one's commissioning you, so okay, I'm going to do it anyway. And then you talk to people that you admire, people that you've worked with in the past, people who you really gel with. You draw on their expertise, they draw on yours, and then somehow, I mean, we were lucky because where Dam is based, there's a community centre in Haggerston. You know, it's a Vietnamese Laotian community centre that now is an art centre, and people use that space. And we're very, very lucky to be able to use that space and to use it for free. All the big works have been developed in this very modest space. There aren't any lights unless you're shining a torch. You say, well, this is what the spot will be here. You know, it really is basic. And I think I've just pulled people together to realize the things that are in my head. And I've been very, very, very lucky, and I feel really humbled and honored that they've said yes, because they're bringing to the table their expertise, their knowledge, their positivity as well, and their belief in the idea. And also they return in different configurations. So I guess I'm borrowing from George Clinton from Funkadelic, because Funkadelic, he has Funkadelic and he has Parliament. P-Funk. And P-Funk, and they're all the same people. There's just a different name for the group, but it's the same people. And I thought, okay, yeah, if that works for George Clinton, I can do the same thing too. So there are different, I mean, for example, 8 Songs from Mad King is something that it's a piece I wanted to perform for many years. It's taken a long time for me to do it, and I've performed it with Apartment House at Wigmore, and then the performance you just watched was at Radio System Films in Berlin with Ensemble MAM, and we had a lot more time to develop that, the choreographic elements of that. They don't move around. I do all the moving in that piece. but also selecting the right players, because you have to, I think it's really important to, if you're developing work and you're working, you want an ensemble, you need an ensemble, that you choose the right people. It's not always the person who plays the best, it's about attitude and vibe. And I've learned that over the years. You know, sometimes you've got a virtuoso in the room, but they're not the right person for the project. You know, it's just not going to work out. And if you know, it's a huge learning experience, because sometimes it just doesn't work out, and it really can affect the piece. And one has to be quite strong and honest with themselves to say, it really isn't you, even if it is them. But it's not working out. Or just really be honest, you know, do you believe in this project or not? Because if you don't, it's just not going to work. Because it'd be like pulling teeth. And that holds the process up. I've only had teething problems with maybe one project. And I get it, you know, instrumentalists need work as well. We all need the work, and people don't want to turn the work down. But if you don't believe in the project, just don't be involved, because you're not helping yourself, you're not helping the others. It's just going to be a horrible experience. And I've had that once, and I'm hoping I don't have it anymore, because it's also very stressful. You're carrying the music in your head, you're writing things out, you're scoring things, you live it all the time. You can't, it occupies everything. The last thing you want are personnel problems. Yeah.
I'm curious, because because you're somebody who I know is a free improviser, performs your own work, that's fixed, you know, and then also does work by other people. And I'm curious, because I certainly feel a lot of free improvisers are used to a culture where you only get involved in projects because you believe in them, because there's no money, so why would you do something that you hated for no money? You know, you might as well do something you love.
Free improvisation.
Exactly, free improvisation. But it occurs to me that there's a very rich culture in free improvisation of people just getting together and willing to go an extra mile. Now, we can talk about whether that's fair or not on those, you know, on those people, but it seems that culture, you know, it doesn't seem a coincidence to me that you're working with people like Mark Richards, who, you know, is a really well-known free improviser, as well as a lot of your collaborators. Do you see that as a difference between working with ensembles and working with the sort of the instant companies that you create for different projects?
Yeah, I mean, there are exceptions, and there are people who are in more established ensembles who have that kind of mindset, and they really love the work. They're eager to be involved, they give ideas, they're sharing ideas, they're really 100% behind it. And of course you get people who are just watching the clock, and they're just kind of scratching away, and that's unfortunate. But I think because I'm coming out of that culture of free improv as well, and kind of let's just make this happen, I kind of expect others to feel the same way. And also because my background also involved a lot of gospel singing, and the way I was raised, and like every weekend, you know, it was people were singing, you're being asked to sing, you're asked to put something together, and you're doing it for praise and worship. And I think I learnt my free improv skills from that, because there was never any time to do anything, and it was like, the Lord will give you the words. I'm like, better, because I haven't got the words, I don't know what I'm doing. And so you go up and you do it, and you're like, okay. But it's also it's kind of that community, that feeling of being supported. And I think in the free improv scene, there is that also, that collegiate kind of coming together, and everyone's in it together, and we're just making music, and it's about the music. And if it's not about that, then we shouldn't really be doing it. We shouldn't be involved. And I love it when I have had the experience, and I had that experience with established, well-known ensembles who have that mindset. But they're not free improvisers. They're amazing contemporary musicians, but they love what they do, and they are very supportive and open and warm and welcoming. And that's such an incredible experience, because it's not something that I would naturally think would be their environment, and that's what I'm not expecting it. It's not what I expect, so it's such a joy when that happens.
It occurs to me with projects like 8 Songs for Mad King, because I know prior to you telling me that you were going to do that, I sort of did not picture a world where you were saying, oh, I'm going to perform some Peter Maxwell Davies. You know, that's part of my musical world. But what really strikes me is that you met the piece head on and you said, well, what is this piece really about? And let's think about that and make a staging of it. And you make the piece, you bring the piece to a new level by adding all of this staging and this choreography to it, that I can't think that he wouldn't have been thrilled to see this interpretation and the piece having this new life. And I think we're used to that idea now culturally, the idea that maybe we can actually interpret things, we can do versions of them, we can stage them rather than simply try to do an absolutely precise, reconstruction of a recording that was made in, the 60s or the 70s. And so what I'm struck by is that it's sort of, you force, in a way, you make Peter Maxwell Davies become your collaborator, but by the way that you treat, the piece with the level of seriousness, that sort of maybe other interpreters might not have seen in it. So how did it feel to do this, to sort of take this, add these components? Like, did it feel invigorating for you to feel here's something from the past that I can sort of spin and sort of push into the 21st century?
Oh yes, very much so, particularly with that piece. And I've performed half of Miss Donathorne's Maggot, and I really hated it, so I just think it just doesn't do anything for me. But this piece, I think also because of the vocalists who have tackled it before, and how they've tried to push it forward. And I think I just wanted to try, it's a piece that could be easily preserved in aspic, and it's done this way, but you then have to just go back and do the research and, reminded myself it was written for an actor. I was reminded that it was written for an actor who was looking at listening out for and exploring the sounds made by men who were suffering from PTSD. What that is, it's a monodrama. So that really that was like unlocking the key for me. And I thought, wow, I can really try and find a different interpretation for this work. Me as a black woman playing George III, the piece being about destigmatizing mental illness, very important thing to remember, given the time that it was written, the time that the fact that late 60s there was so much change, the influence of, I was trying to kind of channel a bit of Jimi Hendrix in there, kind of that kind of spirit as well. George III, who was not pro-slavery, although his son was, and then that's referenced in the work that it had kind of passed me by when I listened to it as a student. So I thought on all these different levels, there's so many things that can be teased out to kind of freshen this piece up, and less is more in terms of staging. And so for that performance, no one's expecting us to be all in bright, sporty colours. But I thought I have to see the seed of hope in the piece, because it's actually in there, that the George III character knows that he is ill, but also knows that it needs to get better, and it's that kind of ray of hope and so that's reflected in the clothing, and it's also a very practical thing in terms of movement as well. It's very comfortable, and I just thought we could just change things up. These little things, not making a massive big deal about breaking the violin, because that's not what the composer wanted anyway. That seems to have kind of etched itself into other performances, and I've heard horrific stories of pieces flying into the audience and half blinding people, or this wrestling with the violinist to take the instrument and people being punched in the face. And I thought it doesn't need melodrama. There's enough happening in the work dramatically. Just do what's in the score, and then you can, in the interpretation, you bring the human, you bring the humanity back to the character, because actually the fact of mental illness is a fact, and it can happen to anyone at any time. Anyone can get ill, and it can all go horribly wrong. So I'm always trying to keep the humanity of the character there, and that was very effective. It affected me. And there's one of the songs where, towards the end, where he talks of where is the queen, you know, and he's calling the queen Esther, and that's not her real name. But it's so sad, it's so poignant. It's really at that point you think this, he knows everything, everything has gone, just completely gone wrong, you know, and he knows it. And, you know, they say that this other woman is my wife, and that is his wife, you know, and what is that, how, the tragedy of that. So there was so much information for me to deep dive into. I was really, really happy to do it, and to take a very old work, it's like, I think it's 55 years old this year, and to test it with a new interpretation. For me, that's the strength of contemporary. If it can withstand a new interpretation, if it can withstand, test the work. If it's strong enough, it can hold it. It can stand it.
It's very interesting because you talk about that work the same way that you've talked about the other works. You know what I mean? It's still, it's that level of engagement, you know what I mean, and digging in super deep. And it'd be fantastic now if we could open it up for a couple of questions from the audience. But before we do that, I suppose the last question I'd like to ask you is, like, we're here at a university, you know, and you've spent a lot of time over the last day and a half with the students here, and it strikes me very much that, like, your path, you have sort of formed your own genre and the way that you want to work by forging these relationships. And God bless the community centre, you know what I mean, in Haggerston. Like, some of them have just been happenstance that there happen to be spaces. But so if you were thinking of what training would you want young musicians to be able to have access to, in terms of to be able to develop their practice, the next generation?
The next generation, I think it should be a holistic practice. You know, I would love for composers to do movement work, for instrumentalists to be encouraged to continue to compose even if they don't think they're any good at it, for people to work in a more interdisciplinary way as well, to forge those, to feel encouraged and confident to make groups whilst you're at college, because that's an amazing training. It really is, and you're in a sympathetic, supportive environment. The world outside of college isn't so nice, and it's much more expensive. Okay, that really does define a lot of things, what you do when you leave as well, and to see everything as an opportunity and to take risks. You know, I just did what I did because I couldn't hear a composer writing for the kind of vocalist that I am. And a vocalist who is interested in movement in the way that I want to explore it. So I made the situation for myself. I created it for myself. Whether it was going to be successful or not, I had to do it. And if it all fell apart, then I tried, and I'll try something else. But I'm always, you know, I just trying something new, you know, and I'm always finding inspiration from other art forms and involving and incorporating them in the work or in some ways. And when I've been invited to compose pieces for players who are not free improvisers or people who are used to working with graphic scores and things, it's always a huge challenge for me because of the things I'm hearing. I don't see a notation that can really capture it. So it's also pushing me, and I like to be pushed. And I think that students mustn't be afraid of being pushed into an uncomfortable kind of place in terms of how it's pushing them musically, that I'm trying to find the right way to express this. I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable, but it's like, okay, what is this challenge? How am I going to rise to it? Not, I can't do that, you know, or I don't want to do that. And I used to be quite blocky before, and I think that was a fear of failing. But I guess I'm too old to care now, so I just go into it. And yeah, embrace everything, embrace all the sounds that you hear around you. There's no hierarchy of music. Something really arrests you and it gets you going, then enjoy it, embrace it, try it for yourself, try incorporating it in your own music making. Yeah.
Fantastic. That sounds like a great educational plan.
I don't know how much it would cost to do it all.
Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
Let's just gather some questions for the mid-interview chat, because we're just close to the start of the concert.
Oh, the concert's at 7? Yes. Oh, I thought the concert was at 7:30. Yeah, because we're not going to do questions in the middle. We're going to just do them now. Martin, you have a question? Yep. I'll do mic duty now. Yeah, so for the people on the interwebs.
Hi, so when we were speaking earlier, you discussed the fact that you were doing jazz, and I just wondered, does that in some way feed into your creative practice still? Or?
Oh yes, undoubtedly it does, but not in a way that I think is really implicit, because it's more about the freedom of it. I don't have those distinctions. I've said jazz, and I think I've said jazz quite a lot over the last day to the students. It's a form that gives me a lot of freedom and inspires me. Harmonically, it inspires me, rhythmically, but it's not the only music that does that. So I don't have it in the back of my mind when I'm making pieces, but I think it's more of the openness that it provides. That's what I draw on. And I'm the world's worst jazz singer in terms of singing jazz standards, and because I only know about 3 very well. So I've had to fight people calling me a jazz singer. I've always found that, not because I have a problem with jazz singers. I love jazz singers. They're great. But I think that says more about the people who are responding to me saying, I work with the voice for my living as a singer. And they said, oh, is it jazz? Because they see me and they see my colour and they immediately think that's what I do. I said, no, it's not jazz. Just, this is my name, check out my work. And then they're normally really quiet and have nothing to say.
Any other questions? Anybody? Oh, okay.
Hi.
Hello.
I, to be frank, just stumbled across your video of the project about being human and praxis, a massive project, which I noticed was basically happened in Germany, and I just wondered whether you felt, let's say, Germany was a more sympathetic environment in all sorts of ways to your sorts of work, and one aspect of which is there's more money over there, I suspect, for your sort of work than there is here. And so, it's harder here than in Germany. Question.
Okay, yes, I think in Germany it has been more, my work has been, they're more receptive to my work, and I think, money aside, I think they aren't risk averse, and I think there's a problem with that here, which it hasn't always been that way, but I think it has become that way, and I've got lots of people here in the UK who champion my work and have been hugely supportive. So that I'm grateful for, but sometimes we have to go where the opportunities are afforded us, and if that means leaving home turf and being somewhere else, then that's what needs to happen. But a lot of the work is made here. It's kind of finished off there, and it's such a shame that money is the defining thing in terms of the amount of time that's needed to make the work. And some of the master's students that I had a really nice lunch with today, they heard some backstory on that very project, that it wasn't all plain sailing. But the fact that we were able to get it over the line and to present it to a live audience in 2023 was great. I'd love that, you know, larger institutions would just take a punt and invite these works. I'm not the only one. There, you know, Jennifer makes incredible work and has work presented here. But we shouldn't have to fight, you know, to kind of justify everything. If you believe, I think, if you believe in the project and you believe in the artist, then you should try and support it. And in fact, Sweet Tooth was commissioned by visual arts organisations. It was not commissioned by any music festival. And the premiere took place at the Bluecoat Arts Centre in Liverpool, and then in London at St George's Bloomsbury, which is a beautiful Hawksmoor church, and then at the Museum of London Docklands. So it's never actually been presented within the context of a music festival or a contemporary music festival. But I took it to Bergen, to Borealis Festival. And there are other festivals in Europe that are interested in the piece. So it's hard. It's because it's a book that I'm proud of, and it's one that I would love to bring to a festival in the UK. I think there are, you know, maybe Huddersfield or maybe London Contemporary Music Festival would consider, well, they do present amazing work, but they have, I don't know what their budgets are like, but they're probably not as big as those in Germany.
Zach, I think you have a question.
Hi, Elaine.
Hello.
So in watching some of your works and thinking about them, it struck me that especially when you're singing and moving, to me it came off almost like you were conducting in a way, as not conducting necessarily with a baton and 1, 2, 3, 4, but conducting the energy of the group and kind of signaling to them the kinds of moods and risks that you should be willing to take. And I was wondering if you see yourself in that light as you're doing something like that.
I hadn't thought about it in that way. That's a really good question. I think what tends to happen is we're all prepared, and then we're all show ponies. Okay, so once the light, I feel the light, that's it. It just switches on, and then we conjure this kind of energy into the space. And I'm really interested in how music, the power of music, power of live performance can do that. And I call it triggering a space, because I want people to forget where they are and they're completely immersed in the experience of what they're seeing and experiencing. And so I think this, I guess it's me, I am kind of not conducting, but I'm like, come on, let's do it. This is where we're going, this is what we're doing. But we're all doing it to each other, and it works really well. I mean, it's, in the context of Sweet Tooth, it works well because we're used to working in a more free way. Although there are things that need to land at certain place, we're very well drilled in that. And sonically and musically, we know what areas we're exploring, because I will have guided them. We would have tried lots of different things out. I mean, Sylvia Hallett plays violin. She vocalizes, plays the accordion. And in the Bergen performance at Borealis, she picked up a saw. I'd forgotten that she played the saw. She picked up, someone just, a handyman had a saw and left it in the room. And she picked it up and she started bowing it and playing the saw. I said, that's it. Yes, the saw. Yes, that's what we need. So the saw's in. You know, it's that thing of also being flexible enough to change things in the moment and to not freak. Because it's that thing of, okay, yeah, I hadn't thought about the saw, but that's the sound I needed. Because I can't remember, she'd left something back in London, so she was looking for something else and just saw, oh, right, yeah, the saw, why not? And it was fantastic. And so it's having that kind of freedom and openness to those changes that need to happen. And even with pieces that are well known and that are scored out, there needs to be, I feel, as someone is performing, you've got to elevate and lift, bring that score to life, bring it, make it live, let it resonate. And that is the job of the performer, to do that, to take it to the next level and have the confidence to do that, and to maybe just slightly give, if there's a bit of leg room, just kind of do something else with it. It's the magic. That's what we're looking for. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, I think that's a beautiful place to end, because the students are about to bring the magic now of new works by students and several works by Elaine. But before we get to that, can you all give Elaine a very warm round of applause for a fantastic look into her work?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.